Hey guys, today on Watch with Poppy, we are going to be talking about the latest episode of Deception. So the very first thing that happens in this episode is we find out that Vivian's death is officially ruled a homicide. So of course that kind of sends everybody crazy. The family, the media is going crazy. Because now of course it's not just that this heir is overdosed on drugs, but now it involves murder, which makes it even more kind of salacious and scandalous. Now remember at the end of the last episode, we saw Edward going to see Ben. So we get a few tidbits of information from the conversation that Ben and Edward have. One thing that we find out is that Vivian was actually on her way to see Edward on the night that she was killed. And the second piece of information we get is that Edward has agreed to help Ben, but he wants proof of all of these kind of accusations that Ben is bringing to him. And throughout the episode, we see a couple of different flashbacks between Edward and Vivian, and you see Vivian kind of going to Edward and saying, like, you promised to help me, and you kind of see his struggle with the whole situation, because obviously, yeah, if we blow the whistle, then that's a good thing, but on the same end, it's also kind of ruins our family business and our family name. And so Edward is looking for proof. Now, kind of throughout this episode, Ben seems like he is on the edge of like breaking. He's obviously extremely upset that Vivian is dead, because it seems like he was genuinely in love with her. He also kind of realizes that he's probably next in line for death because of this whole whistleblowing thing. And so he is just like extremely stressed and kind of pressing Edward to like help him. And at one point he even says to Edward, all I need is 5 minutes. Like if I could get 5 minutes inside of Bowers Pharmaceutical, I could get the proof that you need. But at the same time, Edward is kind of telling him like, well, you can't go back there because everybody's looking for you. I feel like in this episode, a lot of the puzzle pieces kind of fell into place. And one of those pieces has to do with Julian. So if you remember in the pilot episode, in the opening scene, there's this whole bit with Vivian where we see her kind of running to her car in a dark alley. She feels like someone's chasing her, and eventually we get that she knows the person and she tells him to get in the car with her. Well, in this week's episode, we learn that that person was Julian, and we see them have this argument, which is really kind of vague, although at one point Vivian does call him a fraud. And we get that he hits her, but we knew that because he's wearing the ring that makes the mark on her cheek. So we get basically that conversation, if it was the last one that they had, was really not a great one. The important tidbit of information that we get from that conversation is her calling him a fraud, because immediately that makes us think that she's talking about the cancer drug and that he's a fraud because of that, because the cancer drug doesn't work. But I guess we don't really know if that's what she was talking about. So I guess that's something that we will learn. Okay, so let's talk about my favorite deception character, and that is Edward. So Edward's having a tough week, basically, because now that his sister's death has been ruled a homicide, basically all of the media in the world thinks he did it. And that's because of this whole Kimberly Yeager business that happened years before, where he was accused of killing this girl, but he was never convicted, never tried, or anything like that. But I guess it's the court of public opinion that really matters, and so he's really kind of feeling the heat. So at the same time, the Bowers Pharmaceutical Company is feeling that as well, and so the board of directors go to his father and basically say, we want Edward to step down. We want you to tell him that, and we want him to come and kind of give us his resignation. And there's a scene between him and his estranged wife, Samantha, where she asks him to come with her. Now, because remember, Samantha and the kids are moving. Like, at one point, Joanna goes to her house to deliver some paperwork and also to try to kind of question her. And she is, like, in packing mode. So there are boxes everywhere, and her and the girls are getting ready to move to Santa Barbara. And when she and Edward sit and have this conversation, she basically is like, come with us. And she kind of paints this picture of like, come with us, we'll get away from your family, we'll be together, it'll be great, you can open your own practice, and things will be fine, they'll be better than they are here. And for just like a brief second, you get that Edward is like almost considering this. And you kind of see this really tender moment between the two of them. But of course, there are kind of things that are holding Edward back. And I think a big part of that is Vivian. The fact that Vivian is dead, but not just that, that Vivian was murdered, and he knows why. So because of the promise he made to Vivian, and of course Ben, I think those are things that are pulling Edward to stay and to kind of finish what he started. And I think kind of almost in honor of Vivian as well, because remember in the pilot episode, like when he goes to the morgue to identify her body, and he looks down at her, and I think he like brushes her hair from her forehead, and he says like, I'm sorry to her. And I just remember that from the pilot episode, and I always wondered what that was from. And I think it's because he felt like he failed her in this whole kind of situation. So for the briefest moment, he considers it, but I think deep down he knows he can't leave until he figures out who killed his sister, basically. Unless he did it, and I really hope he didn't, because I really like him. So let's talk about Samantha, his estranged wife, for just a second, because for a little while, you know, when she first talks to Joanna, it seems like she's gonna, like, spill her guts to Joanna. Because Joanna kind of mentions, like, hey, I'll come over, we'll have some wine. And she was like, oh yeah, come on over. And it sounded like, yeah, I'm really gonna get the info from her. And then Sofia comes into play, right? So Sofia is like a pit bull, man. This woman is like so intense. So, of course, once the family hears that Samantha and the girls are moving, Robert says something to Sofia, and she says, well, do you want me to talk to her? And Robert's like, yes, please. And so she's like, okay, I will. And you think, okay, she's just gonna go and have a little like girl-to-girl talk with her. But, of course, with Sofia, it's never just that. So, basically, the two are like playing racquetball one day, and she like shoves this woman up against the wall. She's got her like racquetball racket like shoved up into this woman's throat, and she basically tells her, you are not taking my grandchildren away from me, that if you try to leave, we will have you deemed an unfit mother, and the next time you see your children, they won't even remember your name. That is what she said to her. And so Samantha is basically scared straight at this moment. And the next thing we know, she's holding hands with Edward, and they're all lovey-dovey, and we're happy, and oh, marriage is so hard. And, you know, is what she tells Joanna, because Joanna's like, what happened? You know, like, and she's all like, oh, marriage is so hard, but I'm so glad we worked it out. And so Joanna's still like fishing and still like, well, hey, I'll come over if you ever want to talk. And she's like, no, I'm fine. So you just kind of get that she's, yeah, not going to be talking, and she's going to be doing what she's told because she's afraid of the family, and she's afraid of what's going to happen to her and her kids if she doesn't. The other thing with Edward that happens is kind of in the end, the whole thing with the board of directors, he goes in to the meeting where he's supposed to kind of give them his resignation, and he doesn't. He gives this really kind of great little speech about himself and about, you know, everything that's happening and how he totally understands where they're coming from. But at the same time, he tells them, like, look, I've been accused of all these different things and I'm not guilty, and I've never been convicted or tried of anything. So he basically tells them I'm not leaving. And in doing so, the funny part was that he kind of exposes some of them. So he like points out all of the things that each of them has done and been convicted of, or things that they've kind of like brushed under the rug. And tells them, like, look, nobody's perfect, neither am I, and I got a lot of work to do today, so I'm about to go back to work. Now, of course, the big anticipation of this episode is that Julian has to go to this conference in the Bahamas for work. There is a Lyritrol conference, and there's all these doctors and cancer patients and different people coming together as the company really kind of revs up to release this cancer drug that's going to make them millions of dollars. And at the last minute, Robert comes to Joanna and tells her, I want you to go with Julian to this conference, and I just really want you to keep him focused and make sure that he does what he needs to do. Let's talk about that just for one moment, right? Because there's part of me that wonders if Robert is not just like the master manipulator. Because I think he sends Joanna, sure, to look after Julian to some degree, but I also think that he knows about their past. You know, I just have a feeling that this dad would know what's going on in his house. And so I think he knows that the two of them were involved when they were teenagers, and that there's this kind of connection between the two of them, and that part of his manipulation is knowing that, you know, Julian would want to have Joanna there. So I thought that was a little devious on his part. But anyway, so J&J, Julian and Joanna, are in the Bahamas, right? And Will, of course, is just like, he drove me batty this episode. Well, first of all, when he found out about the car, he was just like, really? Like, he's trying to get in your pants and all this other stuff, which is probably true, but hey, you know what? And then when he finds out that she's in the Bahamas with him, he says something to her like, remember who you are, or something like that. And it was just like, what? Like, I wanted to smack him. So he's super jealous because he knows that Julian is like, you know, this rich, like, playboy, and so he's a little concerned about Joanna. Now, of course, at this point, he doesn't know anything about their past relationship, so I'm sure once he finds that out, it'll make that 10 times worse. It actually sounds like that'll be coming out in the next episode, so That'll be something I'll be looking forward to. So they go to the Bahamas for this conference, and we learned a lot about Julian. I felt like we got to see like a deep side to him. Like, first of all, the man was a doctor. Like, really? Like, I never would have guessed that from where we were going in this. Yeah, Julian, he's just great. Like, he tells these great stories about why he wanted to, like, make this drug, and about this girl that he met in this cancer ward, and how he was just basically tired of seeing people die because of cancer. And it's just a very moving story, and you get that, you know, this drug is going to do really well. Then we meet this character, and his name is Senator Haverstock, and something tells me he's going to be important. So Senator Haverstock is a senator, of course, but it also turns out that he works for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And for a drug to get put out into the market, it has to be approved by the FDA. So of course he's there, you know, so that the company can kind of kiss his butt a little bit and try to get their drug, you know, through their trials really easily. But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen too easily, because it sounds like Senator Haverstock has like a real kind of past with the Bowers family. So at one point, like towards the end of the conference, he pulls Julian aside and tells him, like, look, it's nice, all of this stuff that you've done this weekend, your speech was all great, but your drug is not going to pass through the FDA unless I get a sit-down meeting with your father. The problem with that is that along the way, Julian tells Joanna that Senator Haverstock and his dad had a falling out. So there's obviously some backstory to that relationship, and I'm sure we will be hearing more about that in the future. Just a note on that as well, once Julian gets home and he mentions this to his dad is like, no. Like, I'm not going to talk to him. You'll have to figure something else out. And Julian's like, there really is no other way. I mean, we have to get our drug past the FDA. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, so the other thing about Senator Haverstock that was interesting is that at one point in the episode, Will kind of gets approached by this reporter who's like, hey, I'm doing this article about Vivian Bowers, and she's trying to get a comment for him. And he's pretty much like, I don't think so, lady. And she's like, oh, I've got lots of pictures of Vivian. You might want to check those out. And so that piques his interest enough that he goes with her back to her office to look through these pictures that she has. And what he finds is he finds a picture of Vivian and one of Senator Haverstock's aides. He finds that point interesting, and so he calls Joanna, and they kind of make that connection. So I think Senator Haverstock is basically going to be a problem for the family, and for Lyritrol. So we'll have to see how that works itself out. Let's talk about the Bahamas and J&J. So they get to the Bahamas, and he buys her like a whole new wardrobe of clothes and bathing suits and all this stuff. And that night at the thing, you know, she wears this beautiful dress, and they go for a walk on the beach, and they're holding hands, and there's, you know, it's just a romantic evening. At the end of the night, they're headed into their rooms, and he's like, well, do you want to come to my room for a drink? And so she says, sure. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to go get some ice. And so she's like, okay, I'll go in. So she goes into his room to have a seat, but there's someone there. And this guy looks like he's trying to steal Julian's computer. And so Joanna, because she's a police officer, basically tries to tackle him. She runs, and, you know, they struggle. And, you know, he kind of wins, basically. So Julian comes in on this and thinks this guy is, you know, trying to hurt her. And so he, like, smacks him with the ice bucket, and this guy goes running off. Joanna, again, who is the worst undercover cop ever, tries to run after him, of course, and Julian's like, what are you doing? Like, stop, just let him go. And, you know, then they have this whole little scene because her foot is cut because there was glass, and so she's got this cut on her foot. So they're sitting on the bed, and he's like bandaging her foot up, and they're giving each other the eye, and there's wine involved. And so eventually there is kissing, and just like this one kiss, basically. And then Julian says something to her too, like basically how easy it is for them to just like slip back in to this relationship that they have with each other. Like, that's how comfortable they are with each other. And you could definitely tell that Joanna is not undercover at this moment. Like, she is feeling this moment. And I'm sure those words from Will are ringing in her head. The whole, remember who you are, business, whatever. Jealousy is thy name, basically. But the kiss is all we get, and that's kind of it for the night, because Julian's a little freaked out because somebody tried to steal his computer, of course, and that probably has something to do with the drug. At one point as well, Joanna asks him about the trials, because she tries to play dumb when Senator Haverstock tells him that his drug's not going to get through the FDA. You know, Julian's like, I don't know what he's talking about because our trials were perfect. And the way he says it, it's like you really almost believe that he believes that. So I don't really know if Julian knows that the drug killed people or if there's somebody else that's covering it up. That really is the question. I'll tell you who's looking really guilty about this point, and that is Dad. Robert Bowers, to me, is the guiltiest looking person in the bunch, basically. Because we've seen what he's capable of and what he will do, you know, for his family and for his company. And so, yeah, he's looking really guilty about this point. Okay, let's talk about Mia for a few seconds, because obviously in this episode, she spent the whole time, like, having this adventurous day with a stranger. So she meets this guy at, like, an art gallery. You know, she's there with this other guy who's just kind of a bore. And she's looking for a piece to buy, but she's not finding anything that captures the moment, as she says. So this guy kind of walks up and is like, basically, you need to capture the moment yourself, and I'll show you a moment. Like, just come with me. And so there's a little flirting, and she goes with this guy. They end up in some, like, broken down warehouse, and there's, like, this concert, and it's, like, a cool looking place, and she's taking all kinds of pictures, trying to capture the moment. And these two are kind of connecting as well. At one point in the night, though, she's off in this warehouse taking pictures, and this random kind of guy comes up to her, tries to steal her camera, and this new guy that she met, whose name I didn't catch, comes in and saves her. And she leaves, you know, that day and goes back home, and, you know, she's just like, I had such a great time with this guy, and you get that she's kind of really into this guy. But the problem is that we're not really sure who this guy is or what his motives are, because later on we see this new guy pay off the guy who tried to attack Mia in this club. So we get that the whole thing was kind of staged, so that really that this guy could gain Mia's trust. So we're not really sure who he is or who he works for or what the purpose of that is. I'm really curious to find out who this guy is and kind of what he wants, because he obviously wants something. Okay, so a couple of things at the end of the episode. One, as they're coming back from the Bahamas, Julian and Joanna are photographed by, like, the paparazzi. So something tells me that that's going to be a problem for Joanna's cover. You know, even though I've already said 1,000 times before, this woman is the worst undercover police officer ever. Now, kind of the big reveal at the end of the episode for Joanna is that, you know, once they get home, she's sitting with Mia, she's looking at the pictures that Mia's taken, and Mia says, hey, look at this picture I took of Julian and Vivian. And in the picture, Julian is wearing the ring with the 3 diamonds. And so you just kind of see her demeanor change. And, you know, you get that she's just kind of like, oh my gosh. So next you see Joanna going to see Will, and he opens the door and he's kind of like, hey, what are you doing here? And she's like, I just remembered who I am. Whatever. And she goes in and they start kissing and they sleep together. And as they're lying in bed, she says to him, I think Julian Bowers killed Vivian. Okay, so for me, that was a huge leap that she took. I mean, we went from Julian has the ring that probably made this mark to Julian must have killed her. That's a pretty big leap there. Now, sure, does that make him a suspect? Or does that make us think, wait a minute, we need to look a little closer at Julian? Perhaps it does. But for it to go all the way to Julian must have killed her seemed like a really big kind of... It just seemed like too big of a leap for me. I think what that kind of scene revealed, though, is that Joanna has really kind of been letting herself go with Julian. And you get that she was willing to kind of go down that road with him, kind of back into that we were in a relationship when we were younger. Maybe that's something, those feelings that I had, maybe that's not over. You could get that she was kind of maybe buying into that a little bit. So when she learns this kind of bit of information about him, it like crashes that for her. And you kind of get that she's really hurt, and that's why she kind of runs to Will. I will say it again, I'm going to be so shocked if Julian is the killer. I think next week's episode is going to reveal a lot of information. I mean, first of all, you've got Will finding out that Julian and Joanna used to have a relationship when they were younger, and it sounds like she's going to try to get close to him to try to find out if he's the one that killed Vivian. So overall, I thought this was a good episode, and I think this show continues to get better episode after episode. And I will say that after 3 episodes, I have finally made the step of officially making this a series recording on my TiVo. So that says a lot about the show, and that says a lot about how invested I am in this show. So I really like it. I'm hoping that it does well. I hear a lot of people saying kind of crappy things about it, but I'm hoping that it does well enough that it stays on the air, because I'm going to be pissed if I don't find out who killed Vivian. I'm going to be really mad. So let's hope that that happens. Man, that would be really sucky if that happened. Like, if we didn't find out who killed her, like, if it got canceled. I'd have to write some nasty letters to NBC and tell them, like, you need to tell me who killed Vivian Bowers, because I need to know. Okay, guys, that's it for my madness this week. I will see you guys again next week for another Deception review and recap. I love having discussions about what's going on in the show with you guys in the comment section, so if you feel like I missed something, or if you had some insight into something that you saw this week, please leave that in the comment section below, and we shall discuss that further there. Okay, thanks. Bye.